You're sitting on the couch, scrolling through endless speaker options, wondering if you'll end up spending a good chunk of cash on a set that looks great on paper but ends up sounding flat in your living room. You've probably already imagined a few what-if scenarios. What if the bass never really fills the room? What if the speakers look out of place with your decor? What if the amp you already own can't drive them properly? I get that hesitation, because I've been there too, and I spent a few days actually listening to the Wharfedale Diamond 12.4 Floorstanding speakers before hitting record. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the space you'll be putting these in. The Diamond 12.4 is a three-way floor-standing unit, standing a little over 3 feet tall, with a walnut veneer that leans toward a mid-century modern vibe. In a typical mid-size living room, say, a 12 by 18 foot area with a decent amount of furniture, the speakers sit comfortably without crowding the floor. Because they're tall, they do a good job of directing higher frequencies toward ear level, which means you won't need to tilt them dramatically or use a separate bookshelf speaker to fill the sweet spot. Now, the sound. Wharfedale markets these as crystal clear and wide frequency response, and that claim holds up in the real world if you pair them with an amp that can actually deliver the power they're designed for. The recommended range is 30200 watts per channel into 8 ohms, so a modest 80100 watt integrated amp or a modestly powered AVR works fine. When I fed them a 100 watt Class D amp, the mids opened up nicely, vocalists and acoustic tracks sounded natural, and the piano in a classical piece had a decent sense of depth. The tweeter, which sits on a separate dome, gave the high frequencies a smooth sheen without the harshness that some cheaper floor standers exhibit. The bass is present, but it's not the kind of earth-shaking rumble you'd get from a dedicated subwoofer. In a room with a rug and a couple of sideboards, the low end stayed tight and didn't turn the room into a boomy mess. If you're a movie night enthusiast, you'll notice the speakers handling the soundtrack's dynamic swings fairly well. Action scenes with explosions and orchestral swells felt powerful enough to make you lean forward, yet the dialogue stayed intelligible. The wide frequency coverage helps keep the on-screen ambience, think wind and rain, from getting lost behind the louder elements. However, because there's no built-in sub, you'll feel the true low-frequency punch only if you add a separate subwoofer. That's a hidden trade-off. You get a clean, musical bass, but you'll need to budget for a sub if you want that cinema-level thump. Let's talk about who should actually consider these. If you already own an AV receiver or a solid stereo amp in the 80150 watt range and you're looking to upgrade from bookshelf speakers to something that fills the room more naturally, the Diamond 12.4 is a solid step up. They also work nicely for a dedicated music listening setup where you value accuracy over sheer bass impact. The walnut finish is a plus if you have a warmer interior. It blends in without screaming for attention, and it's more forgiving of dust than a high-gloss black cabinet. Who should skip them? If you live in a small apartment where floor-standing speakers would dominate the space, or if you have a tight budget and can't afford a decent amp to drive them, you'll probably end up underpowering the speakers and hearing a lackluster performance. Also, if you're a bass-hungry gamer or movie watcher who wants that visceral low-frequency thump without adding another component, you might be better off with a floor-standing model that includes a larger bass driver or a two-way design that leans more on low-end output. There are a few practical quirks worth mentioning. The walnut veneer, while attractive, is a surface finish that can show fingerprints and light scratches over time. It's not a high-gloss lacquer, so a quick microfiber wipe does the trick, but you'll want to avoid abrasive cleaners. The speaker's rear panel has a single binding post for the speaker wire, which keeps the connection straightforward, but it also means you need to be tidy with your wiring. A messy bundle can look untidy in a room where the speakers are a visual focal point. Another thing I noticed during the listening sessions was the room fill capability. Because the drivers are positioned fairly high, you'll get decent dispersion, but the sweet spot is still a bit narrow compared to some larger cabinet floor standers with wider horns. If you frequently move around the room while listening, say, cooking in the kitchen and watching the TV from the dining table, you might notice a slight drop in clarity as you step out of that sweet zone. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a nuance that matters for families where the listening position isn't fixed. In terms of value, the Diamond 12.4 sits at a price point that feels like a middle ground between entry-level,